Learn the most empowering hiring techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with your host, Rick Girard.
All right, so hiring great salespeople is not as tough as you may think. And the key to this is a great phone screen, what I like to call a discovery call. So here's why the discovery call is so important. First, people are the most truthful in their first conversations because they have invested very little time or emotional bandwidth. Second, interviewees are not expecting a level of diligence early on, so they're not as guarded with the information given. Now, this allows us to gather more accurate data to truly understand if a person is positioned right for your unique company based on the candidate's desire and level of performance. I'm Rick Girard, and welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. We help entrepreneurs and executives win the strongest people. We do so by sharing insights from top-performing rebel entrepreneurs, game changers, and industry leaders like our guest today, Mr. Todd Gorell. Now, Todd is the Chief Growth Officer of the Pavement Group, where he's responsible for driving revenue and team growth for the most advanced, dynamic, and market-diverse facilities maintenance company in history. With over 15 years of executive sales experience, Todd has built and led teams, developed new business segments, and fostered customer relationships across various industries, scaling the business 10x in the past 4 years, which is what makes Todd the perfect expert for today's topic. Todd, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show today.
Rick, thank you for having me.
It's one pleasure to have you. It's
one heck of a build-up. I'm hoping I can deliver here, but that's a great intro. How are you?
Well, you know what? We always talk beforehand, and you shared a great story with me. So I'm pretty sure you can deliver because I love great stories. So let's start with, let's talk about lone wolf salespeople, which, those are the hardest people to kind of, get rid of once you have them, right?
Sure.
Share this story with me, like, about that one interview that you hired that, wasn't all it was cracked up to be.
Yeah, sure. Well, this was early in my career. This is probably 15, 18 years ago, something like that. I was new to sales management. I honestly had no idea what I was doing. And we were starting to build a team. I was with a fast growing construction company. And I met this dude and he was probably 20 years older than me, interviewed really well, had some success, not really in our industry, but in, a few other, sort of adjacent industries, right? So looked great on paper, very charismatic. So we hired him, it wasn't too much. I met him once, sat down with him, talked to him for about a half hour. I'm like, yeah, we need you. Get in here. So the story I was telling you that I'll share. He was sort of a lone wolf. And I learned early on, the importance of a good interview process. This was a hard lesson, but also trying to decide if somebody's going to be coachable, if they're open to coming into your culture, sort of your way of doing things. You have a salesperson here that had 20, 25 years of great success, made a lot of money, did things obviously successfully enough to do that, put himself in that position. We just sort of had a program and a process that we were following in the company. And I didn't bother to ask him if he was willing to adapt to that. And so we fought for the first couple of weeks trying to get him to just sort of, I don't want to say do things our way, but we had a CRM we were using. He didn't like that. We had a certain methodology, certain cadence for sales and stuff. I got it, kid. Don't worry about it. Well, about 3 weeks in, he had set up this big meeting. Said, I got these guys on the hook. You got to come. We're going to launch. You got to be there. Talk about the company, but I'll handle it. I'll close it. So I show up. And he's like 3 Bud Lights deep at the bar. This is noontime, right? And even though we're in construction, we're a pretty professional company. We weren't drinking at lunch at these meetings.
Sure,
but we were. And so, Rick, it was hysterical. So I'm like, dude, we're not drinking here. These guys aren't gonna be drinking. I know them. I know they're not coming in here getting hammered at lunch. Like, don't worry about it. This is the way we do it. This guy was like 6'3", had been a linebacker in college, big personality. Well, we sit down. Everybody else orders iced teas. He continues to drink probably 8 or 9 Bud Lights and just gets plastered at the meeting. He's almost legless by the end of it, the end of the lunch. So we let him go the next day. He gave me an out there, thankfully. But again, came in very headstrong. I didn't really test at all sort of like what he was like, what his personality type was like, all that. I just saw numbers. I saw experience. I said, get in here, let's bring it on. And it was a real problem.
Gosh, you know what? It's so common too. Like this story we've all experienced, right? I can remember I hired a really good experienced recruiter. Um, she was, once she came into the environment, she was completely against working the same way everybody else did, and as a result, like people didn't like coming to work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's tough.
a situation where like she ducked out, which was great for us. But what ended up happening was the month after she had left, our production roof, like everybody was dancing in the office.
Okay.
They were all splitting up her companies, and I think we were averaging maybe 100 to 150K a month, and we shot up over 350 that month, the next month.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, you've seen the issue too, I'm sure, with the nature of what you do for a career.
Yeah.
A lot of times, the worst actors are the best performers, and you have that balance, right? Geez, they're putting up insane numbers, but they're really disrupting the back end, and you can never really truly measure what that cost is. But ultimately, if you could, it's expensive.
I found that the best interviewers are often the worst hires. And I feel like it's because they get a lot of practice interviewing. They get really good at it, and like reading the
Sure.
room and telling people what they want to hear. Um, I don't know. And I've almost found the opposite. Like the people who don't interview that well tend to be like the best performers, because again, they're busy working. They're not comfortable. Interviewing is a very uncomfortable situation. It's like going on a first date, right? Like
Yeah, sure.
it's scary, right? And
Yeah,
so,
yeah, definitely.
you know, it, it's almost like, you give it extra latitude. I found that you give it extra latitude, that those that are kind of nervous and not really super polished, you find some gems there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that.
Yeah. Are you listening to the Higher Power Radio Show? I'm your host, Rick Girard. And for our podcast listeners, we're going to take a quick educational moment from our sponsor. All right, I'm digging in deeper with Todd Gorell, and we're actually, Todd is the Chief Growth Officer of the Payment Group, and we're talking about hiring salespeople. But actually, we're going to spin it a little bit and talk a little bit about the importance of the phone screen. And you guys kind of created a unique. I'm guessing it kind of sprung off the backbone of this really bad hire, right? You found you kind of created a
Yeah,
unique way of which how you've structured your interview process. And so let's talk a little bit about that. So how did
sure.
you actually, after that, like what did you learn, and how did you kind of start to structure your interview process?
Well, so I'll give you a high level first, the way we work, and I'm going to give a shout out to Eli Stower, who's kind of my partner in crime here. He's our director of national sales of the Payment Group. So he and I team up when we're hiring people, and I
Sure.
think having two people involved in that process that are going to be doing the hiring, not necessarily just like HR or somebody that's a professional interviewer, but if you're hiring for your sales team, if you can get two people involved there, I think it gives you a great lens, and it gives you a great opportunity to bounce things off of each other.
For
So our
sure.
process is we'll do a phone screen. One of us does the phone screen, and then if they pass the phone screen, the other person does the first interview. During that time, we never compare notes. We don't talk at all. Just sort of pass the phone screen with me. Get a first interview. If that goes well, let's talk after. So then after we both had a chance to independently meet with the person and ask our questions, and, we do both take a little bit of a different approach. We get to sit down with our notes and say, what do you really think? So that way you're not really coloring it for the other person. If I did the phone screen, I'm like, rock star, get him in here, Eli, go talk to him. He's obviously going to go in with some preconceived notions. So we try to avoid that part of it. And it really is helpful. So then if we
That's
decide
really smart, because like too often we talk about candidates and people go in with a preconceived notion and
100%.
almost a directive, right? I've seen it happen all the time where, hey, look at this person is out of XYZ company. We got to figure out how we can hire them. And then, there's almost like people have two different interviews that happen. You have the oh my gosh, we got to do anything to get this person. I'm going to sell them.
Yep.
Or there's the other interview, which is, yeah, I'm going to try and screen this person out or look for a reason not to hire them.
100%. And I mean, we're in kind of a tight industry. Yeah, I mean, there's thousands of pavement maintenance companies, but the bigger ones or the larger facility maintenance companies that kind of, work for the same customers we kind of know the cultures at a lot of those other companies. So if somebody's coming over, they might have been a great performer there. You're usually like, well, why are they leaving? So we want to kind of dig in and say, hey, if they were successful, why wouldn't that company fight to hang on to them? There's things like that where you really want to get to the bottom of it. Let's figure it out. And Eli and myself will ask very frank questions during the interview process as well. Like, how come you're here? What happened over here? Let's really get into it. So,
all right. So what do you do in the phone screen? So walk me through your phone screen.
So the phone screen, again, this is really specific for salespeople.
Perfect.
But we're listening for, kind of behavioral stuff. What I want to see is really three main things. And if you think about it, if you can check these off during the phone screen and feel either comfortable about it or maybe disqualify a candidate, you're saving yourself a lot of time and a lot of effort there. But if you're comfortable talking about money, right? Because that's so important for a salesperson to be able to do, right? That's a major behavioral component to a successful salesperson. And you'd be surprised how many people are afraid to talk about money. So just throw it out there. What do you need to make? What are you hoping to make? What's a big number to get into it some way to find out their comfort level talking about money.
Okay. So let's drill down on that a little bit. So so if I say, hey, you know what, I need to make 200K.
Yep. That's a great answer right there. 200K, great. We'll put that in the notes over here. But if you're kind of hedging, you're probably not comfortable talking about it,
Yeah.
If you're not going to get to and I know everybody's sort of negotiating when you're at that. If you're on a phone screen, people are generally a little surprised to hear it too. So you're going to get a pretty honest answer, I think, or a pretty honest assessment of who they are, because it's going to come out organically. They're probably not expecting that in the first 10 minutes of a conversation. And not that we're trying to surprise somebody. I just want to see how you react,
Yeah.
Because a customer's not going to prepare you for every question they have or every objection that they have, or, so it's when you're in that phone screen, it's sort of like a cold call, and we treat it that way.
Yeah. And you never know when the customer is going to ask you how much is the product, which is clearly a buying sign, right? Like, okay, you got me interested. How much is this, right? How much is it going to cost me?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. You got to be able to maneuver around that.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, so are you judging them then on how well they maneuver around that question, how well they present on it, how quickly they respond?
Yeah. I might ask a question back to Rick, like, all right, well, what was your best year?
Okay.
What was the most money that you made? And some people might think that's rude. I was raised not to, well, good salespeople really can't. I don't think you can have that, imprinted on your brain that talking about money is necessarily a rude thing or an improper thing. Like if I was hiring for other positions, I wouldn't necessarily think of it that way.
You know what? I totally agree with you. It's funny. I always hear people complain about the fact that salespeople are the hardest ones to hire for. And I don't agree with that because I think they're the most exposed. Now, if you talk to salespeople, every single person is amazing. Like, oh my God, I meet quota. I'm great. I do this. I do that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I've never had a salesperson that I've talked to say, hey, look I'm just a mediocre salesperson. I need to be trained
Right.
and I'll work hard for you. Like have you ever experienced that?
Yeah, I mean, only if you're hiring somebody that's new to the industry or new
Super
to
junior.
sales, something like that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I've never been someone that's been in sales for 10 years. Like, I need a reboot. Somebody's got to teach me how to do this. It's not going well. I've never met anybody that was willing to admit that.
No, not at all. I've never met it either. But when you kind of ask those probing questions like you just did, and I think what's key is like you're actually drilling underneath the hood here, and I think that's the thing I want to expose to the audience is that okay, well they give you an answer, okay, so let's drill down on that. So what's the most money you made in a year? So how did you do that, right?
Sure, yeah, that can take you a lot of places.
That's the story that you need to find out in order for us to understand whether or not somebody is truly a good salesperson.
Yep.
Okay, so comfortable talking about money. What's your next interview question, or where you go next?
My next one is really their ability to listen and then ask good, sort of appropriate questions.
Hmm.
So I would talk more, and I talk more in an interview than I would in a selling situation, because I want to see if they've got the ability to listen, if they're comprehending, or if they're just sort of preparing themselves for what they're going to say next versus giving good, thoughtful feedback. That's there's the old saying, a good salesperson could talk a dog off a meat truck and whatever. It's just so not true. Like we very much abide by the 80-20 rule when we are training our sales folks that, your prospects should be talking 80% of the time, and you should
For
be
sure.
really dialed in, listening, and not just ready to rebut with selling them something, but understanding where they're coming from,
Yeah,
what their problem to solve is or whatever. So you can really tell if they're rushing through the conversation, if they keep interrupting you, things like that. Those are tough signs. But if you get someone, man, that's quiet, I love that. I love that. Some people might be put off by that. They're hiring a salesperson like, hey, sell me this pen, whatever. Not the way to do it. If they can sit there and really listen and act interested, my life's pretty boring. They can act interested in me. They're probably pretty good at sales. So,
well, I feel like there's two different types of salespeople. I mean, there's transactional salespeople, like you go into a car lot and you gotta really kind of push to get somebody to buy the car, right?
sure.
Or like kind of what we do. It's not a slam dunk sales process. You need to take time. You need to cultivate the relationship. You need to build a use case. You need to it's more of a B2B type sale, right?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And those
Without
are
question.
two totally different animals.
And it's like all the cliche stuff too. That's very true for our industry and our company. Like it's a long term. I've had some of the same customers for almost 20 years now because they're in the facilities maintenance world and I'm in the paving world, and I have been and they have been, And so we built great relationships over time. That doesn't happen in one transaction, and and you gotta make them look good ultimately. So
For
that's
sure.
what we want to see if a good salesperson can listen for those things that the people, that the facilities managers or whatever are really saying. Because everybody's going to say, I need a cheap price, I need it done tomorrow, all that stuff. What do they really want? What's really important to them? So if somebody has the ability to listen and then give good feedback, that's huge.
And by the way, I feel like most salespeople don't listen really well. They show up and throw up, right?
A lot of times, yeah. Well, again, it depends on what you're selling to, but
Yeah,
if it's super transactional, I mean, car sales, that's a whole different animal, right? You got
yeah,
8 seconds or something like that, and it's all the psychology, and you got them on the lot, you can't let them leave, all that stuff. I couldn't imagine doing that. My
yeah,
mindset is very different. That's like a gladiator sport.
yeah. All right. So what now how do you judge the quality of the questions that they're asking?
I don't know if that matters as much again during the phone screen, just if they're interested. Because I'm thinking that when they're meeting with a customer, they're going to have they're going to have questions prepared already. Like they're not necessarily prepared for what I'm throwing at them in this. So just if they are inquisitive, if they want to know about the company, I love people that ask right away about money too. That's a great question to me for a salesperson to be like, give me an idea what I could make there.
Yeah.
Great. I love that. Questions like that. Um, but that's a question that you got to really temper. That could come across wrong if you don't ask it the right way. But I don't know that there's necessarily anyhow like a grading or great questions that they're going to ask. It's just the fact that they are asking thoughtful questions.
Perfect. Okay. Now what's your third component?
The third component, which might be the most important one, is excuse making. Again, the lack of sales, lack of results, excuses made. That's a killer for salespeople in general. So we can knock that one out to get an idea. And that's real easy questions, Rick. That's just sort of, well, why are you leaving your job? Tell me about your last boss. What were the market conditions like there? You can ask some very leading questions there and just hear what people say, how much ownership they take. And I know from doing this for a long time, nobody's going to be like, you know what? I just didn't work hard enough. I didn't put the time in. So there's some gray area in between my boss sucked. They didn't give me leads, COVID, whatever. And what really kind of happened that you can sort of live with the salesperson. So
Yeah. Do you ever drill down into kind of like level with me? Like, what really went on? Like,
absolutely.
what's the real story?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because you could tell someone's holding back, and maybe they're not holding back because of themselves. It
Yeah.
might be like, well, my boss was stealing, and so I had to get out of there. So I had no, whatever. It could have been something pretty tough that they didn't really want to talk about, but you could sense there's something there.
Yeah. Well, I find there's kind of actually, there's three different areas that I usually, like as a recruiter, I tend to hear from candidates a lot, which is, one, I don't have the ability to grow. Two, the business has changed, and
Yeah.
or the content of the work has changed, and um, I'm not really enjoying it. And three, like change in leadership. A lot of times when that shakeup happens, then somebody's either getting cut, or they're just not enjoying who they're going to be working with anymore, right? So
How do you take
um
those things? Like, is that reasonable to you?
it's all about the story behind it, right? And then what I like to do is like kind of really drill down on so that to me is their pain point, right? So what is their pain point for wanting to leave? I like to get a step further and then understand where it is they figure they're going to be the most effective next, right? So um I like to drill into like what their desire is. So like I have a question that I usually, after I learn that the answers to those questions. So if you can create your next opportunity from scratch, what would that look like for you? And I
Okay.
use that question quite often because, you know, especially in a phone screen, it's really good because then people will tell you what their ideal is outside of my company. Where do you feel is going to be the place you're going to thrive? And it's a really low, um, it's almost like a low impact question that they're going, oh gosh, well, thank you for asking me that. I've never had anybody ask me that question. So I feel like I'm going to do best in a company that does this, 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 and this. I like to do this kind of work. So, um, their vision of where they're going to do well, if it matches my company, then I usually will pull them forward. And if not, then I don't. And quite often, when I drill down in, so what would the company look like? What would the work that you would be doing? What would be the size of the company? I'll gather some of those details, and often I hear, I'm a small company, right? So if somebody doesn't
Mhm.
want a ground level startup, um, they're not going to do well here, and I'd be setting them up for failure. But if somebody and I get that quite often, hey, I'm just open for an opportunity. But if Google hired me, man, I'd be super stoked. Well,
Sure.
I'm not Google, nor
Yeah.
nor will I ever be that, right?
Right. Comp package is a little different.
Oh, yeah, just a little bit, right? Um, and then I always like to understand their why, right? So why is this important to you? Why do you think that you're going to thrive in this type of environment? Um, so I think as um, that kind of ties into it ties into um, your ability, like your kind of drilling down and understanding whether or not somebody you know is the problem or they are not the problem. I mean,
Yeah.
just taking it like one step further to
And you
understand.
you don't always get it either. You don't always get it, but it gives you a sense, and then you
Yeah,
can kind of flush some of those signals out through the first and second interview.
yeah. Well, I think when we talked to you, you had said that you like to get to the why questions, right? So, like, what are some of the questions that you drive toward when you're trying to understand whether or not somebody's going to be worth bringing through the interview process?
Yeah, I mean the big obvious why is why are you here? Why are you interviewing? Why are you changing jobs or
Yeah,
considering changing jobs? There's so much in there, and so if you get good at asking those questions and digging down and kind of staying on a topic with somebody, you get a lot of information there, just like you were just explaining with your process.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so that's a big one, and then in the why category, like why are you wanting to stay in sales? Why do you want to work so hard? What is your motivation for wanting to make a lot of money? Because you don't get in sales just to make a little bit of money, right? That's not Nobody ever does that to say, I
no,
just want to work a little bit, have my afternoons to myself. Like nobody's saying that, right? It's they're doing it because it's a hard job, it's a grind. But there can be a big payoff if you get really good at it. So why?
Yeah.
So all right, so you want to make a lot of money, and then understanding that why. What does that mean to you? What does that freedom mean to you? What does that mean to your family? Are you starting a family? Are you looking to run out the clock here? You're late 50s and you need one last run before you retire. All that stuff, because we've got room for all of it at our company, and it's important to understand that why when they're coming in.
Yeah. And you know what? We didn't mention this like the content prior, but I know that we did talk about this offline. You also are pretty big on hiring, firing, and reviewing people based on core values, right? So like you're
Yeah.
tying all back into your core values and understanding whether or not somebody's going to align with those before you allow them to come in, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect.
We actually we have part of our review program, and it's part of the bonuses for about half of our team are based on how they score against our core values. And I think it's huge. You got to communicate it really well. Everybody needs to understand, what the core values are, what they mean, and really what we're looking for and how they play them out from day to day within the company. But it's a pretty powerful tool to manage too.
Yeah.
I had a good friend who's actually owns a recruiting firm like yourself, that started doing that a couple of years ago and had shared the idea with us. And we're huge on our core values. So we're like, let's give it a try. So this is our first year actually doing that. And it's great. It's awesome because you find yourself talking about them all the time too.
Yeah.
You're very schooled in EOS. That's the only way you can get core values drilled into a company. Really, is talking. I mean, the t-shirts don't work. I'm going to be honest with you. The t-shirts don't work. It's just talking about it all the time so people understand, and relating it to an action, so people
Yep.
understand what the importance of it are.
Yeah. Recognition. I mean, it's not the words on a wall either. Those don't work either.
It's
Well,
not.
shoot,
It's
we're
good to,
getting
you walk by like, oh yeah, we're supposed to be having fun.
exactly. So Todd, we're getting pretty close on time. What would be 2 or 3 key takeaways you can give the audience that can plug into the business today?
I would definitely say make that phone screen something you spend some time on before you set up your interview process. Have a good script, and those three things. If people are good listeners, if they're making or not making excuses, ultimately, and then money tolerance. Right? There's like 20 to 25 sales behaviors that you really need to be focused on when you're hiring and when you're coaching people.
Yeah.
Those are 3 that are right at the top of the list. So if you can knock those out during a phone screen, or at least get a good sense for them, you're going to be way ahead of the curve. And then I would
Especially,
also say, oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
I was also going to say that I think doing a team hire, that's been pretty good for us. Eli and I are very like-minded. We've worked together for 4 or 5 years now, kind of building the company together. And we think the similar fashion. So
Yeah.
it's really important for us to not, because I could influence him. He could influence me pretty quickly. So having those 2 people, and do not talk about the candidate whatsoever until after the first interview is done, and then carve out some time, talk about whoever did the phone screen, whoever did the first interview, share your notes, good, bad, pros, cons, that sort of thing. I think that goes a long way.
Todd, thanks so much for your time investment today. And I want to welcome you to the Higher Power Radio community. So what would be the best way in which members of our audience can find you, find your company?
On LinkedIn, Todd Gorell. I spent a lot of time on there. I had a newsletter that I wrote exactly 3 articles for, and I'm planning on picking that back up again someday.
Nice.
And then, Pavement Group, our website's got tremendous resources and information about our company. And then if anybody's writing this down, todd.gorell@thepavementgroup.com is my email. If you want to reach out, shoot me any questions, anecdotes, criticisms, whatever you got.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Higher Power. Quick thanks to our team, Brian Colburn, Andrea Ballin, and Ayla Girard. If you're listening to the show, please subscribe, review, and share the podcast. As we're listening, we welcome your feedback. And, after all, this show's for you. You can join the Higher Power Radio community at Higher, HIRE, Power, POWER, Radio, RADIO.com, or you can drop me an email at rick@intertrue.ai. I'm your host, Rick Girard, and you have been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power Radio. Catch our LinkedIn Live show every Tuesday at noon or download the podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate you joining us on Higher Power Radio with your guide to hiring success, Rick Girard.